Dr. Alison Goodwin, a GP. Well, I was a GP. I'm not sure what to call myself now. So at the start of this conference, I just want to say want to emphasise that we're not giving individual medical advice. These are our personal views, not yet mainstream, and New Zealanders should check the government's website to obtain a range of views. We're not being paid or influenced to be here. So as for me, I'm a Kiwi doctor. I graduated from Otago University in 1993. I worked in an emergency department for a number of years, then started GP training in 2009. I became a fellow of the College of GPs in 2015. I've always been interested in health and have been frustrated by the focus of our health system on managing chronic disease rather than on creating health. To try to address this frustration, I have done additional training in lifestyle medicine, and I understand the power that nutrition, exercise, sleep and stress management can have, both on preventing and reversing chronic disease and reducing vulnerability to infectious disease. Most doctors are not trained in these areas and are unaware of how powerful lifestyle interventions can be. From the start of the pandemic, I had concerns about the New Zealand response. There was no focus on health creation, and no one was counting the cost of the measures imposed on the population. We were hearing from only a few academics, most of whom were not seeing patients on the ground. I listened to these local experts and found them lacking, so in addition to listening to them, I have spent hundreds of hours, probably over 1,500, listening to and watching overseas experts in a variety of fields, practicing physicians in ICU, ED, cardiology, general practice, scientists, vaccine developers, immunologists, virologists, pathologists and others in an effort to learn more. I started asking questions in the limited medical forums available, but these were mostly ignored or fobbed off with partial answers. As 2020 progressed, it became obvious that the goal was a vaccine. Treatment wasn't part of the agenda. We had to adhere to strict containment measures until we could all be offered a vaccine. Early on in 2021, I felt increasingly uncomfortable about the inexorable push for a vaccine to the exclusion of all else. I was concerned about the proposed use of a new technology on such a wide scale, about the short length of the clinical trials and small numbers of patients used to provide the interim data that the national program was based on, about the fact that MedSafe had a lot of unanswered questions even as the rollout started, about the lack of any liability for the drug company, and about the continuing lack of discussion about anything else. The marketing campaign began and the only message was, get vaccinated, it's safe and effective. I was disturbed that no one, apart from Dr. Simon Thornley, in the medical profession was questioning what we were doing or questioning whether it was safe or appropriate. Trying to engage with the profession got me nowhere, so I felt compelled to speak to the public. I spoke on a Plan B webinar around October 2020, voicing some of the questions I had. It turned out there were a significant number of members of the public sharing my concerns. I have continued to speak as the opportunities have arisen, even though I am much more comfortable having individual medical discussions. Assumptions. This whole situation is based on the assumption that we are in the middle of a pandemic of a deadly disease, that the PCR test is a valid tool for diagnosing an infectious disease, and that there is nothing else that can be done apart from vaccinate us all. All of those assumptions should be debated or challenged. I have a document from the Ministry of Health, and in it there is a sentence that says, most people experience mild illness and recover completely using symptomatic and supportive treatments for viruses, such as rest, fluids, and anti-fever medication. The public has been made to think that if they catch COVID-19, they are going to die. Nothing could be further from the truth. The vast majority of people, including the elderly and infirm, will survive. Some people will die, but they are mostly people who are already in their last year or two of life. Those people might want to be surrounded and supported by their loved ones at the end of their lives, rather than be left scared and alone. The average age of death from COVID-19 is 82 years, which is older than the average life expectancy. The survival rate for our children and young people, less than 29 years of age, is 99.986% without vaccines or treatment. There is the possibility of long COVID, but I do not have a clear idea of how many people that is likely to affect and whether instituting early treatment reduces the chances of that occurring. The process of making a diagnosis seems to have been turned on its head, and now instead of talking to the patient to get a history and examining the patient to assess for signs of disease, we are leaping straight to a diagnostic test and telling people they are sick, regardless of whether they have symptoms or signs of illness. I was always taught to treat the patient, not the test result. Maybe that part of my medical education is redundant. What about treatment? We have heard very little about that. In fact, we have heard there is no treatment. At a recent College of GPs webinar entitled International Panel, Managing COVID-19 in the Community, GPs heard from experts in Ireland, Norway and Singapore. I posed the question, what treatments are different countries using for COVID-19, both in the outpatient setting and in hospital? Of the 23 questions asked during the webinar, this was the only one that remained unanswered. By the end of the talk, we had heard about vaccination programs and other public health measures, masks, PPE, home or facility isolation, social distancing, hand washing, etc. only. Not one word was mentioned about how they actually treated patients with COVID or what they did to improve the underlying health of the population. GPs are being told there are no treatments, so when you get COVID, you will likely be advised to rest, drink fluids, and take paracetamol or ibuprofen for a fever. For the majority of people, that may be enough, but you might want to be more prepared. In addition to listening to the Ministry of Health, the Medical Council of New Zealand and the College of GPs, I have listened to Dr. Sahult, America's frontline doctors, Dr. Peter McCulloch and Dr. Shankara Chetty, all of whom have been treating COVID patients in the community and in hospitals. If you are a doctor wanting to have more tools in your toolbox, or a patient who wants to be prepared, I suggest you listen to some of these people. Informed consent. Having been a doctor for over 25 years, I know what an informed consent discussion should involve. It has been abhorrent to me to witness people with no understanding of medical risk-benefit assessment telling the people of New Zealand to get vaccinated. Politicians, sports stars, news readers, business people, workplaces and cultural leaders. Repeating ad nauseum, it's safe and effective, does not equal informed consent. An informed consent discussion should be personalised and private and should include potential benefits of the procedure, but also the risks, uncertainties and alternatives. At the end of such a discussion, a person should be free to choose, free to weigh up the information and make their own decision as to whether or not to accept the procedure. There is no place for force or coercion. Adverse events. As the vaccine program has progressed, the casualties have steadily increased. The number of serious adverse events continues to climb, and the official comment is continue to monitor. We now have, as of last week, 1,125 serious adverse events reported. Strokes, heart attacks, Guillain-Barré syndrome, Bell's palsy, myocarditis, blood clots in the lungs, anaphylaxis, neurological disorders. This number is likely to be an underestimate. These are New Zealanders, many young and previously healthy, whose lives may never be the same again. At what point do we say, stop, this is too much, the risks are now outweighing the benefits? For me, it was a long time ago. I am aware that 94 deaths following vaccination have been reported to MedSafe. At least half of these has been determined not to be related to the vaccine, but it is not clear to me how this determination is made. I'm also aware that the Citizens Database has over 220 deaths. If we were doing proper, robust safety monitoring, every person in New Zealand that has been vaccinated, that has died this year, would be on that list, and that death would be thoroughly investigated. That is most definitely not happening. The medical profession. I am disturbed by the medical profession. There has been no place for debate or discussion. As GPs, we have been advised what to do and how to do it. GPs are the doctors most in touch with the public. We have not been asked about what is happening on the ground. We have been sidelined and ignored. We have been told not to use hydroxychloroquine and not to use ivermectin, but we have not been told what we should use to treat COVID-19. We have been told to get vaccinated, and then instead of trusting the vaccine and demonstrating this by taking off our masks and PPE, we are now being told we must dress up in even more protective layers and separate patients and assume every unvaccinated patient is a source of contagion. In some instances, practices are not letting unvaccinated patients into the building and instead are seeing them in tents or in cabins in the car park, if at all. We will be expected to get an endless number of boosters to maintain our vaccination status. When is it all going to end? When will doctors feel safe enough to behave normally? I recently attended another webinar with the title, "Can I Refuse to See Unvaccinated Patients?" How has the profession sunk so low that it could even consider asking such a question? With regards to the right to decline a medical procedure, I honestly thought my medical colleagues would be standing linked arm in arm at the top of the slippery slope that is forced medical procedures, defending your right. I am horrified that most doctors seem unperturbed by the mandating of medical procedures. Do they really think it's okay to force people to undergo a medical procedure against their wishes? I have had patients tell me they feel as if they are being tortured or raped by this process the government is putting us through. Is that okay? If doctors can stand by and let you be subjected to this procedure, what other procedures will they be happy to let the government force you to have? Will there be requirements to be sterilised before you can do X, Y, or Z? Will doctors be happy with that? Where is their line in the sand? Mine was well and truly crossed a long time ago in this pandemic. The Medical Council of New Zealand. I received an email with letter attached on Thursday the 2nd of September advising me that the Medical Council of New Zealand had become aware of online videos and publications in which I was discussing the COVID-19 pandemic and anti-vaccination messaging. As far as I know, no patients have complained. I was invited to write a response to their somewhat vague concerns. I then received a further letter with more things that they had been made aware of. I have since learned my case was discussed at a supplementary council meeting on the 20th of October. At this meeting, it was determined that I may pose a risk of harm to the public, and they needed to refer me to a professional conduct committee for further investigation. I was asked to sign a voluntary undertaking saying I would not speak in a way that might undermine the national pandemic response or discourage immunisation. A notice under Section 33 of the Health Practitioners Competence Assurance Act 2003 has also been issued, stating, "Concerns have been raised regarding Dr. Goodwin's practice of medicine and professional conduct to the extent that the Medical Council of New Zealand has reason to believe that Dr. Goodwin's practice may pose a risk of harm to the public." The official information that I have been showing and referencing may actively undermine the national immunisation program, but is it not appropriate to allow people to know that the clinical trials are ongoing, that the messenger RNA and lipid nanoparticles are new technology, that the vaccine still only has provisional consent, that there were 58 conditions applied to the provisional consent, that Pfizer has no liability? Are people not allowed to know how to optimise the functioning of their own immune systems? I did not sign the voluntary undertaking. I am currently waiting to find out from the Medical Council what the next steps are. What about anti-vaxxers? What are they? I think this is worthy of discussion. It's an easy label to apply to someone. It has negative connotations and aims to discredit. It's easy to dismiss an anti-vaxxer as a nutter. But what does it actually mean? I am yet to hear a clear definition of it from anyone, including the Medical Council of New Zealand. I have been labelled an anti-vaxxer. I have not been going around screaming from the rooftops that all vaccines are bad and no one should ever get one. What I have been advocating for, from the start, is for people to be fully informed and free to choose. Those are fundamental principles of medical practice that my colleagues seem happy to toss aside. I personally don't have a problem with people getting this vaccine if they have been honestly and fully informed and have weighed up the risks and benefits and are of the opinion that it will benefit them. On my last day of work this week, I wrote a prescription for a third primary dose of a vaccine for a patient. Would an anti-vaxxer do that? If I advised someone with cardiovascular risk of 5% that in my opinion the risks of a statin would likely outweigh the benefits and that there are other ways to keep their heart and cardiovascular system healthy, am I an anti-statiner? There is no one-size-fits-all. There is no medicine where the benefits outweigh the risks for the whole population. So for some people, particularly our children, young people and pregnant women, the risks of this vaccine, both known and unknown, will outweigh the benefits. I would love for someone to define anti-vaxxer for me. Misinformation. At NZDSOS, we have been accused of disseminating misinformation. I would like to point to an example of information sharing using possible vaccine-induced magnetism as an example. Now, I don't have a fully formed opinion about this. No patients have come to me to demonstrate this, and I haven't asked any patients if I can test them for it. However, I have seen videos of people claiming to be magnetic in the region of their vaccination and describing the feeling of something tugging under their skin in the presence of a magnet. I find this interesting and am curious to know more. Could it be a thing? I haven't discounted it and remain open to the possibility that something is going on. Some curious doctors/scientists in New Zealand have taken this further and have investigated. They have collected information and data and looked at possible ways this could occur. They have looked at the types of technology that have been in development by the companies that make the lipid nanoparticles that are part of the Pfizer vaccine and found that substances with magnetic properties have been developed. They have written an article and supplied references. Maybe there is something to it, maybe not. In my opinion, this potential phenomenon deserves more investigation by inquisitive individuals. In contrast to the doctors and scientists, the media, the NZ Herald 90% Project, has made a short 36-second video about this topic. The video states that the vaccine cannot and does not make a person magnetic, and the metallic objects can stick to the skin when it is sweaty. There are no references or scientific information to support this position. Who has more credibility? My next comment is about vaccine passports. I have heard from politicians, business people, campground owners, media personnel, Air New Zealand and others about how great vaccine passports will be to keep us safe. But I have yet to hear a medical person explaining what information they think a vaccine passport will provide. In my opinion, a vaccine passport, green pass, digital certificate, health pass, whatever it will be called, makes no medical sense and does not demonstrate whether you developed any immunity, whether your immunity has waned, whether you have some immunity but you're still able to be infected and transmit the virus, whether you have superior natural immunity, or whether you have any other infectious disease. It does not demonstrate, to me, anything about your health. However, it does demonstrate that you have been obedient and complied with orders. If it is not for health reasons, I think we need to consider carefully what it will be used for. If there is a health professional out there who can explain what medical information can be gleaned from a vaccine passport, I would love to know. I did have a quote, I guess aimed at all the people that have lost their job and are wondering what the future holds and what's coming next, and this is from Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So personally, I think we need a new health system that focuses on health and a new education system and probably some other new systems in New Zealand as well. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Matt Shelton. I entered medical school 41 years ago, and for most of my professional career, I have worked in general practice. I want to state that my opinions, whilst informed and concrete, are not shared by the majority of my colleagues in the New Zealand medical workforce. And I wish to refer people to New Zealand government sources to obtain the wide range of views on COVID-19 and the vaccination. Thank you, Alison, for recounting your professional journey that many of us can relate to. We formed NZDSOS precisely because of a commonality of concern around major red flags, particularly the dismantling of long-standing ethical structures and agreements. We weren't frightened of COVID-19, but were intensely curious to learn as much as we could about the biggest medical story of our careers. We were eager to learn from the success with safe, well-known and understood, repurposed and cost-effective therapies that were reported in the medical journals, but then undermined with fake clinical trials. We have watched as legitimate questions and observations by experts that were early on derided as conspiracy theory have proven themselves to have been accurate, and seen the initial doomsday scenarios have not come to pass, except in certain parts of the world for reasons that are now well understood and can be used to our advantage. Although we are frequently derided for being only a small group of doctors, those that have signed our earlier letters to authorities and who have named ourselves represent a tip of the iceberg of more doctors and dentists, medical scientists, pharmacists, vets, economists, business people, and community leaders, and high-profile New Zealanders. Pro rata for our population of 5 million, we would be 1,200 doctors in the UK and about 7,000 in the US. Indeed, tens of thousands of doctors around the world are voicing their concerns, joining together and sharing research, clinical experience, and tactics. The highest profile leaders and eminent experts have been deplatformed, censored, vilified, and in a few cases made to fear for their lives. Amongst our doctors, we have specialists in surgery, anaesthetics and intensive care, pathology, haematology, neurology, general practice, orthopedics, integrative medicine and environmental health, epidemiology, public health and psychiatry, research, respiratory medicine, and radiology. In fact, we could probably staff our own hospital, and the way things are looking, we may have to. As a group, we do consider ourselves well able to assess data and understand the science. We understand the biases and the groupthink that all special interest groups can fall victim to, and we check and consult widely with each other to review new data, and indeed each other. Many of us have been vaccinating our entire careers and fully understand vaccines, as well as any industry-funded talking head vaccinologists who have never actually treated a real patient in their entire careers. Further, and this is critical, we have between us thousands of years of clinical experience and of interests outside of medical practice, of governance, medical politics, clinical trials, research, and very importantly, we understand history and the human condition. The struggle to resist and overthrow tyranny, greed and corruption, the instinct of some for control and violence, our susceptibility to the Faustian bargain of alleged safety in exchange for freedom. All these elements are on display as what could have been another seasonal respiratory infection plays out. We have never before locked up healthy people and crucified the economy, nor introduced a rushed vaccine, with never before used genetic technology into communities already harbouring the infection. This is a recipe for disaster. Some of us, and many of our patients, have come to New Zealand as refugees from frightening and totalitarian regimes and cry tears of frustration and pity for the kind but complacent Kiwis that might be sleepwalking into jeopardy. They recognise danger signs in our country, and we all see the harsh and cruel measures used against our Australian friends, and hear this week that fully 1/3 of the Austrian population is confined to house arrest for being unvaccinated. What has happened to our world, and what can we do about it? Where is the humanity, the tolerance and kindness, the free speech and debate, and what has happened to the institutions we trusted to guard and maintain our cherished democracy? Many thousands of Kiwis gave their lives in distant lands so that we would not be stopped and asked for our papers. It is not mere rhetoric to call upon the spirit of the Anzacs. They sacrificed so that we need not. Will we today make it that they have failed? So here we are in November 2021, 7 billion doses of vaccine with no justification for a moderately severe flu. But most diagnosed infections won't have anywhere near the suffering that the flu causes. Nor is there justification for the masking, lockups, and social distancing when you look at all the evidence. All so tragic, especially since there is growing evidence on the ground and from peer-reviewed science that these vaccines do not prevent infection, nor transmission, and do not make any difference in the number of COVID-19 cases. Last month, our Chief Medical Officer admitted in a statement to the High Court that he did not know if the vaccines prevent transmission. And our Director General of Health and COVID response ministers both stated that they hoped it would. Well, we can help them with that. It doesn't. Researchers proved that viral load is the same or higher in vaccinated people, and a just published Lancet study of UK households showed that the vaccinated were more likely to infect other people. And we must lock away and persecute the unvaccinated, deprive them of their livelihoods, liberty, healthcare, remove them from society, for refusing an experimental jab, for an infection that is not deadly in almost everyone. Why are we not trusting natural immunity and testing for it, as it is proving clearly superior to the temporary and inadequate results of the jab? The protection early on that the elderly at-risk population seemed to have against the original Wuhan coronavirus is fading, just like that virus itself. In fact, it has come and gone. But we are now left with the variants, wave after wave in countries that have rolled out their shots. This was predicted when you vaccinate into a pandemic. This is Public Health 101. It's why we give the flu jabs in the autumn. We don't wait to see if there will be a flu epidemic, because we've learned what can happen. But both Dr. Fauci and the world's most successful vaccine investor have just admitted that the COVID vaccine is failing. Of course, they are talking up the boosters, for which there is absolutely zero safety data, even in animals. A study of 68 countries and 2,500 US counties just published in the European Journal of Epidemiology has just proved that vaccination rates are unrelated to COVID case numbers. Remembering that there is much to be desired about the accuracy of the PCR test used to justify the lockups and the muzzling. Heavily vaccinated countries are having overwhelming surges in case numbers. Israel, which is exclusively Pfizer, by the way, and well into its booster program, Iceland, Ireland, the Seychelles, Gibraltar, the UK, and many parts of the States have high numbers. In fact, Waterford in Ireland has just announced the highest case numbers in the country in the face of a staggering 99.7% vaccination rate. No doubt the other 0.3% will be to blame. What are people saying? That my vaccine won't work until you have yours? Really? In a recent hospital outbreak in Israel, 95% of the cases were fully vaccinated. The double vaccinated in Scotland now comprise 89% of the deaths from COVID-19 in a trend that has been increasing for months, according to the latest technical report from Public Health Scotland. A month ago, the figure for England was 86%. As of yesterday in New Zealand, only 17% of new COVID-19 admissions to hospital were in unvaccinated people. So the next time a social media influencer looks you in the eye and tells you that if you get the vaccine, you cannot die, please recognize disinformation. But we must remember that the total deaths are still very small relative to total infections diagnosed by a PCR test that multiple courts around the world, and even Dr. Fauci and the CDC, admit is not fit for purpose. At the cycle threshold of 40 or above that is used here in New Zealand, most tests are false positives. Please remember that as the media spoon feeds you the daily community case numbers. Our health authorities are refusing to let our doctors do what they are trained to do, including to do no harm with experimental drugs. But instead gets us before the New Zealand Medical Council if we speak out on any of these issues. At least 2 of us here are about to be suspended. We continue to hear, though, from patients and clinicians that calm reports of suspected harm are not being lodged. Remember, these reports only require a suspicion, not proof of vaccine harm, and must be made if we are to pick up the signals. We find it deeply disturbing that the New Zealand Ministry of Health is forcing many thousands of health, education and other workers to take the shot, which has also produced many severe side effects, and we suspect may be linked to the deaths of over 250 New Zealanders, and many more with life-changing injuries. As we learn about vaccine complications, it is clear that the difference between serious injury and death is pure luck for many people. Again, we challenge MedSafe to properly investigate, to please prove us wrong, instead of them hiding behind the claim of not enough information to assess. In an important paper from Queen Mary's Hospital in London, researchers looked at a random group of reports to the Vaccine Adverse Effects Reporting System, or VAERS, in the US. They concluded it was only possible to rule out 14% of cases as definitively not caused by the vaccine on the provisional assessment, before detailed and expert assessment must then be undertaken. Austrian pathologist Dr. Peter Schirmacher found that 60% of a series of consecutive post-vaccine deaths that he autopsied were caused by the vaccine, with findings never seen in any other condition. A team of German pathologists has validated his findings. Dr. Jessica Rose, immunologist and computational biologist, has a report on the CDC website detailing by multiple different methodologies the likely death rate to be at least 10 times the number reported to VAERS, which is currently about 18,000. These systems are known to underreport, probably dramatically, and it is very likely that our CALM system is very underrepresentative of the true death and injury toll. We are not claiming to know with any certainty, but it is not our job. Our job is to raise concerns, and we expect our institutions to do their bit. Our government was earlier found guilty of breaching its own rules when they gave provisional consent for emergency use authorization for the vaccine for the whole country, so it quickly changed the law. Does that same cavalier attitude explain why the MedSafe CALM system is so lagging with its register of severe side effects and deaths linked to this vaccine? MedSafe and CALM are being regularly informed via members of the New Zealand Health Forum as to their latest citizens database information, available on our website, and which is now including some children. These heroic people are filling the gap that our health sector should be active in. What normal human would not want to investigate these possible cases? We are in a clinical trial. It is the time spent watching for effects that makes it so, not the number of doses given. Based on many testimonies from patients and healthcare workers, some of these are sworn legal statements. We can say confidently that our pharmacovigilance is failing. In clinical trials of new medications, the drug is guilty until proven innocent. The US alone is reporting, as I say, over 18,000 deaths on its system, equivalent to our CALM, but multiple independent, highly qualified researchers are calculating figures many times higher. Although some countries now seem to be stepping aside, it seems that there remains a lockstep coercion to jab and boost everyone over and over from cradle to the grave, and discredit any other treatments with mountains of real-world evidence and that will save lives if given early to high-risk patients. Taking paracetamol and throat lozenges and waiting to go blue is the official approach, apparently. Where is the duty of care from primary care? The GP College says these early treatments can't be used. But wait a little, and we expect to see a brand new patented clone of ivermectin approved and sold at huge expense to taxpayers sometime soon, who will also have to stump up for welfare payments to the huge pool of talented and dedicated and smart people now forced out of work by these mandates. So now it's the children's turn. To experiment or not to experiment? Why is it even a question? If you believe that we should experiment on children, we can't help you at this stage. Kids and unborn babies have their whole lives ahead of them for problems to manifest and to pay the price for our recklessness. Reliable figures are emerging, putting children's risk of serious harm from the jabs to be at least 10 to 100 times greater than from the infection itself. Children are even less likely to come to harm from COVID than from the flu. The incidence of heart inflammation from the vaccine is much greater than we first thought, and the Pfizer clinical trial did not have anywhere enough children to produce meaningful results. The British Medical Journal reported, by the way, last week on irregularities, mismanagement and fraud from the main trial. But this news has not been covered by the media, and we're not aware that our authorities have questioned Pfizer on this. We believe ongoing mountains of shame should be felt by anyone who contributes to cover-ups. And we now await legacy media's messaging that it is common for children to have heart attacks and strokes, and that the troubling rise in death rates of people under 50 occurring in most vaccinated countries is some sort of mystery. Check out proper journalists like Mike Whitney and Alex Berenson on Denmark, Germany, Ireland, and Israel, who are all reporting troubling rises. And listen to the Western Australian Premier. His hospital's a chocker. It ain't COVID, and he's very worried about why. In conclusion, we will continue to try to lobby government and health agencies on behalf of people and our profession, whilst fending off their campaign of suppression and intimidation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Shelton, and thank you, Alison. And I don't know how I can follow such really beautiful presentations of fact and critical thinking. My name is Emanuel Garcia. I received my MD from the University of Pennsylvania in 1986, and I began the practice of psychiatry and psychoanalysis in 1990 before immigrating to New Zealand in 2006, where I have since worked as a consultant psychiatrist. I am no longer employed by a local DHB as of a few weeks ago, and I apparently am also under investigation by the Medical Council for having dared to raise questions and have an intelligent discussion in several videos about COVID, about the COVID narrative, and for having written to the Prime Minister and other MPs voicing my questions and concerns about their health policy strategy. Now, I will say at the outset, I'm speaking today as a private citizen, a citizen of New Zealand and also the United States, and as someone not advocating any particular kind of treatment and certainly not practicing medicine. So however the Medical Council may wish to construe my words, I'm not practicing medicine. I am simply giving you my thoughts about something that I believe is critical and very important. I want really to read a few comments and to raise a few questions and to make a few observations. The first thing I'd like to read is a little bit from the New Zealand Bill of Rights, which says that everyone has the right to refuse to undergo any medical treatment. Okay? And the next bit I want to refresh ourselves with is from the Hippocratic Oath, which, as all physicians pledge when they graduate, which basically says, first, do no harm. Now, in light of those basic comments, I also want to say that me personally, I'm not afraid of COVID. I'm not afraid of the flu. Actually, I don't think I'm afraid to die. Now, maybe that's an overstatement, but I think I am more terrified of not being able to live as a free, loving, caring human being who, in order to live, needs to associate with his fellow human beings in a beautiful way. And I'm privileged to be part of the New Zealand doctors speaking out for science. Is that it? Speaking out for science? Yeah. And to have found a group of professionals who have really risked a great deal to raise their voices about what they think is so very important and also to be associated with these wonderful local groups of Voices for Freedom and other people that I've met who have similar concerns about how the so-called pandemic, how COVID, how health is being managed by the government. Now, just last week, I was on the phone with a teacher who was in tears as she asked me advice about how to deal with the fact that she was being told she could no longer work in her profession as a wonderful school teacher unless she got the Pfizer injection. Despite her expertise, despite the care and the enthusiasm she brought to her job for many years, she was going to be fired. And in fact, she has been. And just yesterday, I met with two psychiatric colleagues who happen to be in the Wellington region. Now, the mental health service is not oversupplied with psychiatrists, I should remind you, okay? We are oversupplied with people who are really, really struggling, generally, and even more so from the effects of lockdowns, social control, and everything else. I can tell you that. Anxiety has hit the roof, okay? All of us. But these colleagues have also been fired because they refused to take the Pfizer injection. And they stood for their principles and their beliefs, and they lost their jobs. Now, I know many people, I know nurses, single mothers raising 2 or 3 kids who have also been fired and who have no way at the moment of making a living. So I've got to ask the question, is this about health? If something is so good and so wholesome and so salubrious, why do you have to resort to mafia tactics, basically? I grew up in an Italian-American neighborhood. I know what mafia tactics are like. You get blackmailed, right? You get threatened if you don't do something. We are being told we can't work if we don't get this thing, we don't put this thing in our bodies that they want us to put in. I don't think it's wise. I don't think it's caring. In fact, I think it's criminal. Now, I'd like to ask a few questions because I can't say I'm not a virologist, I'm not an immunologist, I'm not an internist, I'm not a GP, I don't have the expertise in these areas that Alison and Matt have and others have, but I do have the ability to think a little bit. And I'd like to ask some basic questions here. The most principal of which is, why are the authorities not allowing full and open debate of medical questions and public health policy? Why is anyone who expresses an opinion different from the government's narrative considered a purveyor of misinformation or disinformation? Why are medical doctors and others who have voiced their opinions about the potential dangers of the injections and other aspects of COVID management under scrutiny and actually persecution by the medical council? If you have an answer, let me know. I'd also like to ask a few other basic questions which people seem not to ask at all, which is, can you show me the studies that say that wearing a covering over your face, a covering that might be made of Chinese fibers or cloth or any kind of material, can you show me studies that say that this actually prevents transmission and infection of a virus? If you can, please let me know. Can you show me studies that say that staying 6 or 12 feet apart when you go anywhere is going to prevent you from catching something like a virus? Can you show me studies that say that locking up and imprisoning people who are healthy has ever been done in the history of humanity until recently? And can you tell me that they have been effective in doing anything healthy? If you do, please let me and let us know. I think we'd really like to see such studies. I don't think such studies exist, but perhaps they do. I believe that the talk about introducing an apartheid based on those who are injected and those who are not is absolutely disastrous. I think this is absolutely terrifying, and it is no stretch to say this is reminiscent of the Nuremberg laws and of what went on in the 30s and 40s in Germany and other fascist countries at the time. Do we really want a society that is split apart, a society that keeps us from mingling together as human beings in one common group? Do we really believe that a healthy person should now be considered a danger to someone? And that's exactly what's happening. If I am uninjected, unjabbed, I won't even say unvaccinated, because I think these agents don't really qualify to be considered like the vaccines I received when I was a child and which my children got, which prevented infection and transmission. Okay, but for me as a healthy person who is uninjected, why are you telling me or trying to tell me that I am a danger to someone else's health? Please explain that. And finally, please tell me why we believe that liberty is something that can be eroded, given up, and discarded so easily. Thank you very much.
God